You ready?
I was born ready, BK. I was born ready. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Bedroom Super Producer podcast, episode, if I'm not mistaken, number 1616.
That's right.
BK 16.
16. Lucky 16.
Lucky 16 indeed, because in light of the discussion that we just had off air, we need a bit of that.
That's right. Positiveness, hope.
That's it. I'll say humanness, smiles, laughter. And to highlight all of these positive emotions, we've chosen someone very, very special to both of us.
That's right.
Maybe I'll even say could be the GOAT.
Could be the GOAT. Who are we talking about?
We are talking about no other than Quincy Jones.
Oh, the Q, the legend.
And obviously, we could go on forever about Q, but we'll try to cover his main achievements today.
Yeah.
Keep it under an hour, hopefully, because it's 20 degrees outside, sunny, so might as well enjoy that as well.
True. While keeping a safe distance.
Well, that has to be seen, because yesterday no one was really. I've even saw some pictures in New York, and they were certainly not keeping 2 meters of distance.
Human beings always looking for trouble.
Indeed. So let's get started, my friend.
Yes, sir.
For those who do not know Quincy Jones, how would you resume, or should I say, explain what this man did for music in the past 60 years?
Well, basically, Quincy Jones is someone who came from a very humble background, born in Chicago in 1933. Started playing trumpet very early.
I think he was even playing at the age of 14 in clubs, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he was sneaking in through the back doors. And I think actually that's a good story that you're saying that he was 14, because I think he met Ray Charles, who was 16 at that time when he was 14, in those jazz clubs back in Chicago.
Yeah. Was it in Chicago, or they were already on the West Coast? Wasn't it in Seattle or something?
Probably Seattle. You're right. I think he moved from Chicago when he was younger, and then started playing trumpet in Seattle. I think that was it, before going to the Big Apple. So basically, Quincy Jones is a musician, a composer, and to resume, like, basically what he did for music, he pretty much showed everyone what all the multifaceted ways to make music. He was mostly a jazz guy in the beginnings, and then switched from jazz to more like movie soundtrack that we love so much, and then even branched out to making pop music. And so he basically merged everything and showed us that you could pretty much compose or write music in any genres, and there was no bad style or good style of music. There was only good music or bad music, pretty much. In resume, that's who Quincy Jones was.
Yeah, that's something very telling about the character that is Quincy Jones, because indeed he's very vocal about, especially the current state of pop music, and sometimes has even some harsh words for musicians who he thinks are not really making us fellow composers and musicians learn anything. So he's kind of critical in that sense, and But just to round up what you just said, I think that Quincy Jones was also an arranger. He was also a record exec. He could pick talent and mold these artists. But I think that what makes him so special also is the fact that he was almost like an activist, coming from the early days where there was still a lot of racism, especially in the South in the States. I mean, he even used his voice and his music and his connections to show that black people could make any type of music, and certain styles weren't just reserved to white folks. And he really fought for African Americans' rights, to go to clubs and enjoy the music, and to show that black people could make music that was very, should I say, enlightened.
True,
And so
true.
that's he really was like a general to push out black culture into the mainstream, and create jobs, and help people see the art form for what it was. So that's very, very I'd say special about his works.
It's part of his legacy that he really pushed for African music and African um, composers to be recognized. Because, like we said, he comes from a very humble background, and he had to face all that racism because he was born before the civil rights movements in the 1960s. And even when he tried to branch out into soundtracks, I think one of the things that stopped him in the beginning, even if he was a great composer, was that like Hollywood executives in the early 50s um, weren't used to the fact that a black composer could write a soundtrack, a full orchestral soundtrack for a specific movie to capture certain emotions, and people weren't yet used to the fact that a certain type of music didn't have a certain type of a face or skin color linked to it. So he was one of those persons who showed basically the whole, like, the world and the United States that pretty much a composer is a composer, you know,
Yeah.
and he could write string arrangements as just as good as anyone else out there, you know.
I think that actually the his ability to write music notation and arrange for large orchestras and sections made him really different from his contemporaries, in the fact that he could also write, incredible pop music. He could do it all basically. And and to your point, where Hollywood producers at that time didn't know if a black person, should I say, could write, good orchestral music. He was told not to make it too quote unquote bluesy. And I thought that was a kind of hidden racism in a sense, which is
Well, it was because
unfortunate.
it was coming from the fact that like black people were associated a lot with like the big band stuff. We were used to, like, in his early days when he played trumpet and like Lionel Hampton's big band. That's what like Afro Americans were associated with. All the jazz stuff and the horns and the like party music of that time. And people didn't necessarily associate it with the fact that like music is music, notation is notation, and you could pretty much write anything. Of course, the fact that he went to Paris in 1957 and studied with one of the great teachers of orchestral string arrangement, Nadia Boulanger, who was renowned to have taught even Bernstein and Stravinsky, helped them to get that also his competency to a level where he could write more emotional stuff, more classical string motif stuff. So he did his work.
Indeed, and a lesson that she taught him that I thought was incredible was the fact that she sat down at the piano one day with Quincy and she said, "Listen, for the past 700 years, we've always used the same 12 notes. There are only 12 notes, so don't think too much. It's not like you have a million choices out there. And I
True.
thought that was really brilliant, especially coming from a person who, like you said, taught some of the most remarkable musical geniuses of our era, or should I say, yeah, of more modern times. Yeah. And so after that stint in Europe, or actually, I think he stayed in Europe and he actually toured with his own band for a while.
Yeah.
And that didn't go so well.
Well,
He,
I think what happened was that they had like shows for I think 5 or 6 weeks that were paid for and where they like a steady gig. But then after everything else was canceled, then I think Quincy wanted to go on because he thought they had a special magic. The whole band, like his musician, he thought they really had something. So they kept touring Europe. But I think at some point they basically just ran out of money. Then he had to come back to the States. Um, and I think that was at that point when he got his first real job, as he likes to say, at
yeah.
Mercury Records, right?
And he actually got that job because when he came back from Europe, he said in the Netflix documentary that he came back with 145 grand in debt. So imagine in 1960, $145,000 is like $1 million now.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
So that's a lot of money, and it's a big headache if you're a musician in the 60s and you need to repay that money.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of money to repay, indeed.
And so 4 years later, he got his first big break. He actually arranged Frank Sinatra's "It Might As Well Be Swing"
Yeah,
with classics such as "Fly Me to the Moon."
yeah, yeah.
And I actually didn't know Quincy did the arrangements for that, so I went back and listened to this album. And indeed, the horns are quite the big band stuff, but then he has those strings, and I guess that's kind of modernized the whole sound.
Yeah, and like it brought the more orchestral, the softness to get like a more, you can get that more like emotion through a little bit better with the strings than with the horns. But I think that like Frank Sinatra did kind of kickstart also his career, that he did the arrangements for, because then I think they became great friends, and he led his band like through a pretty long stint. And when Sinatra was playing in Las Vegas, it was Quincy who was leading his orchestra. And I think also if we come back to another story about the whole civil rights movement, I think Frank Sinatra helped a lot in that cause, because back in the days, and even in Las Vegas, even when you had the Sammy Davis Juniors and everyone doing their shows, black musicians and black entertainers were not allowed to eat in the restaurant. They weren't allowed to have their hotel on the strip like like everyone is allowed today. They had to eat back in the kitchen. They had to have their hotel rooms on like on the outskirts of the city. And I think at some point when he was touring with Frank Sinatra told, like I think a reporter or someone, he said that if Las Vegas didn't allow, or the promoters didn't allow his band to stay in the normal hotels or to eat in a restaurant, then Las Vegas didn't need him to play there. And I think that played a big role in just getting things moving, and getting black musicians and black entertainers accepted, and having a little bit more leeway in the period where those rights weren't given to all black American across the US.
Yeah. When you think about it, it's such a it's not like it's so long ago that these musicians couldn't get a meal. It's crazy when you think about it, because Quincy being still alive and being able to tell all these stories is
Yeah.
just it's completely different world.
Just the fact that
Yeah.
his own grandmother was a slave tells you how how close these periods still are today. It's not that far away. We can still picture these things today, and we've come so far in such a short time, and it's incredible to think that only 60 years ago things were so different than the United States.
Yeah. And he even said that the technique back then, if you had a black band, was to get a white bus driver
Yeah,
so that the driver could actually go in the restaurant, order for everyone, and take the meals back to the bus.
yeah,
So
that's something.
you had to be crafty to
Yeah,
stay alive on the road.
just to gig on the road.
So, like you said, after the Frank Sinatra stuff, he branched out, did some movie work. One of which is a modern African American classic, The Color Purple.
Yeah,
And I think to me that's his best movie score. I mean, it
You think?
really, really. Well, I mean, obviously the whole. He has a lot of flute or is that recorder solos that make it not grow so well or get old so well, but the rest, the strings arrangements and everything, he's up there with the best. Even though he's really not recognized as a movie composer.
You say Quincy is not recognized as a movie composer?
Well, I mean, if you think about him, it's not the first thing that pops to mind.
No,
is
of course.
what I should
But
say.
I think it's because he did so many things, and I think also that The Color Purple is. I think it's a big step in his career for a lot of things. First, I think. Well, first he did the soundtrack. Second, it was the first it was the first movie that he produced because he also produced that movie. He didn't just do
Yep.
the soundtrack. And also, that was the movie that he discovered Oprah.
Exactly. Well, he did more than just discover her. I think
Right.
he molded her
He
into.
pretty much launched her whole career, like
Yeah.
like seeing her and making her star in that movie, and then just pushing her for the rest of her career. So for me, it's not necessarily Color Purple. I think it's pretty good. For me, the soundtrack that I like a lot is probably the soundtrack for Roots.
Right. Right.
It's very ethnic. It's got for me, the sound design in Roots is pretty awesome. It gets back to, there's African rhythm in there. There's like all these wooden instruments, and it's very ethnic. I think it's different than many of the classical Hollywood soundtrack that we're used to hearing, and it's got a certain flair to it. That's what I like. Because all his other stuff is fantastic, but it sounds a lot like Hollywood stuff. He did things so that people wouldn't recognize the fact that he didn't over embellish things. He just did exactly what was required for the movie.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, obviously, Roots is also a cultural landmark.
Exactly, with LeVar Burton
for African American history.
Yeah.
And let's get to the juicy stuff, man. The 70s, the 80s. That's where he really started to. He basically decided to show everyone that he could do it all and that he could actually produce the best pop music in the world.
But I think on the pop stuff, I think it was even during the time when he was doing soundtracks, because I think that the first pop thing that he did that really put him on the map for pop things, I think it was that song "It's My Party" by Leslie Gore.
Yeah, Leslie Gore was what?
That was the
early 70s or late 60s?
63, I think.
63.
63.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I think it was the first thing that he did, like the pop stuff, that he launched the career of a new artist, and I think they had over 15 different hits with that artist. So I think that's what launched, I think, his like the pop dominance, and it showed that he could he could pretty much do it all. The jazz stuff, the soundtrack stuff, the pop stuff also. He could choose artists that were relevant and that he had a flair to finding new talent, I think.
Yeah, and I'm always amazed at how he was always at the center of these movements. You know, in the jazz, he was right there with Thelonious Monk, Dizzy Gillespie. He was, I think, he was directing the Count Basie band when he worked with Frank Sinatra. So all of the biggest jazz names, he was right there with
Oh yeah,
them,
he did
working with
arrangements
them, producing.
for everyone. He did arrangements for Sarah Vaughan, Ray Charles, Louis Armstrong. He did arrangements, even produced stuff for Miles Davis. So he was really right in the mix of. He really had a knack of being in the right place at the right time, as I'd like to say.
So, should we go directly to MJ?
Do you know how he met Michael Jackson?
I do, actually. He was producing this movie. What's the title of the movie again?
I think the movie was called The Wiz.
The Wiz, yeah.
The Wiz.
Michael was playing this, I don't know if it was an animal of some sort.
I've never seen the movie, but I think it was kind of a remake / copy of The Wizard of Oz. And I think that's how they met, because I think Quincy Jones also did the soundtrack for that movie.
He did. He actually did the whole thing in 2 weeks, apparently.
Yeah, and oh my God, such a
Imagine that.
Such a workaholic. And I think that's how they met, because Michael Jackson was slowly starting his solo career, and he needed a producer for his first album, which was going to become Off the Wall. And I think he asked Quincy for advice on who could produce, and Quincy, I think, volunteered himself because he saw something in the kid.
He did, and he saw actually the potential that he could turn Michael into this like biggest pop idol ever. He already saw the potential, and he wasn't mistaken.
So he pretty much, I think he brought his whole team, even for Off the Wall. And they just hammered out these songs, and that's why I think if you take a look at the musician listing on these albums, you recognize a lot of the guys, right? I think.
Well, I mean, they're all legends, especially for Thriller. I'm not so sure about Off the Wall. I think that he really brought like the all-star team for Thriller. He already was working with people like Rod Temperton for Off the Wall, but who else played on that album?
Well, you know that Quincy worked with Brother Johnson's, right? So on Off the Wall, there's incredible bass lines by Louis Johnson's.
Oh, so even in the Off the Walls days.
Yeah. There's a lot of.
Yeah, what's that song that you played me the riff once? I didn't even know it was Michael Jackson, and then I had to go back to Off the Wall.
I don't remember. Don't remember.
I'll pull that up for our listeners, because they absolutely need. There's actually 2 groundbreaking bass lines in that one song.
Well, there's the bass line for "Rock With You" that I liked a lot, and which one was the other one? Get on the floor, right?
Exactly. Get on the floor is the one that's
a classic Louis Johnson's Music Man bass line right there.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Also,
absolutely insane.
Also, the interesting thing about Quincy Jones is that since he was from that all jazz era and from the old jazz, and he mixed everything and the orchestral, and he mixed it with bebop and everything, he was also one of the pioneers who kind of introduced the electric bass to the whole jazz scene, because the whole jazz scene was mostly upright and like walking bass lines on the upright. And when the P bass was invented by Leo Fenders back in the, I think, mid 50s, Quincy Jones was the first one to jump on that and say, "Oh, that's something interesting, and new sound, a new type of bass sound." And he started incorporating those in his recordings and even in his bands. So it's an interesting part of history.
For people out there, for people out there who don't know what a P bass is, It is a model that was created by Fender, and they called it the Precision bass. And what's so special about the build of that bass, BK?
It was the first incarnation of having an electric way of like getting that low end. So you had the guitar. We went from classical guitars to like a Fender guitar to an electrical guitar, and then pretty much someone at some point just said, "Well, why don't we make the low end electric too?" So
Right.
and the P comes from the pickup configuration. The way they're installed, it kind of looks like a P. So that's why they
Huh.
call it a P bass.
So he was the first producer to bring electric bass to jazz music.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Not sure if it was the first, but he started incorporating it a lot in his recordings.
And so then after Off the Wall, they assembled an even bigger and better team to create the best-selling album of all times.
Indeed, and what we're talking about here is, of course, Thriller. It's still my favorite album of all times to this day, I think.
I'm gonna have to say it's probably my favorite MJ album at the very least.
Yeah, of course. There's something about that sound that's still awesome to this day.
And I think that sometimes people forget how intricate the songwriting was on these early pop albums. And I have this little quote here from Quincy, who said, talking about Thriller, that they had C sections because, quote, "You have to keep the ear candy going because the mind turns off when the music doesn't change." And that tells a great story about how pop music was back in those days, where they had, pre-choruses, choruses, post-choruses, bridges, and all of these really intricate chord changes from part to part or segment to segment in these songs. And they made it work so well because, and I think that's why we made it such a point to talk about the jazz days, that the fact that these guys actually could write the most intricate music, and yet they were also hired to write the simplest radio music they could. And I think that it shows, and Quincy is also very vocal about musicianship, and he likes to say that all of the guys that he brought on for Thriller, they could play.
Of course, of course. And it's like he really assembled a huge team for that album. I think even like he co-wrote the songs with Michael and also with Rod Temperton. I think he said that they went through something like 200 different songs just to pick the right 12, the right 14 songs that would best suit the album, and then redid the arrangements to, like you said, to always have that ear candy, to always keep that everyone's attention on everything, and to cut everything at the right length, the right pre-chorus, the right chorus. So it was really it required a lot of experience, I think, to be able to pull off an incredible album like that, and the time that they did it in.
I actually have a different number. In the Netflix documentary, again, he says that they actually went through 600 songs.
Well, there you go.
For Thriller.
There you go.
So that goes to show that he's way more than just a composer, arranger, producer. I mean, you have to be kind of a talent scout to be able to go through songs like that and be able to pick out the ones that'll work for an artist. That's
true.
A completely different job in itself, picking songs. Something that we don't do as much today. I mean, yes, you have writing camps, but it's different. The songwriting process has changed a lot. But yeah, I mean, on Thriller, he also had Paul Jackson, who worked on Daft Punk's Random Access Memories.
Yeah, an incredible guitar player.
Louis Johnson was also doing some bass work on there.
Yeah, Louis Johnson did some bass on that. Of course, there's the infamous guitar solo by Eddie Van Halen in Beat It. So plenty of like he said, ear candy in there, like the song with Paul McCartney. Of course, the incredible intro to Thriller by actor Vincent Price. It was one of the, I think when I listened back to it when I was little, it's one of the most eerie but fun intro ever to a song, with the door squeak and everything. It's fantastic.
And his accent too.
Yeah.
The thriller.
Thriller. It's totally
So
awesome.
how many copies did Thriller sell worldwide?
If my research is correct, I think it's 50 million copies.
Well, so here
50 million copies. I think eight Grammys. I think it's still the best-selling album of all times.
I think it's like 130 million.
You think?
120 million.
Wow.
So that's something you won't see again, I think.
Yeah. So for me, that album is totally incredible. Totally incredible.
So, and then a year later, a very, very special song came about.
Yeah.
And again, Quincy was at the very epicenter of that project.
Yeah. I think I think he did that like after a Grammy Awards or an American Music Awards, that like everyone was there. I think that's when they did the best-selling singles of all times, "We Are the World."
Indeed. So best-selling album, and then the year later, best-selling single of all time.
Yeah, so it's absolutely incredible. And they raised something like $63 million, I think, for famines in Africa. So it was, you see that how it tells you a lot about his character, how he would pretty much just call them up and people would just say yes. Say, what other producer that we know could just call up Bruce Springsteen and call up Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson and just say, come by the studio tonight, we're recording a song, and they just come by, you know? Supposedly that there's a story that says that Bruce Springsteen came by with his old pickup truck and he just parked it down in like a shopping mall parking and just came in by foot in the studio. So it's incredible to hear those little stories of incredible moments in history like that.
Oscar even woke me up this morning and he was like, "Can you play this song, We Are the Sun?" And I was like, What are you talking about? It's 6:30 in the morning. There's no such song." And then later on during breakfast, he started to sing it. "Oh, we are the world." You know that your godfather and I are going to talk about this guy later on today.
Yeah.
So
Incredible.
even the younger generation, they understand. They know who the boss is.
Yeah, who the boss, Quincy the boss.
Even the newer generation could not get close to the original.
Oh no, but you see it when you
the Akon produced, or no, it was Wyclef produced it. Well, got the people in the studio and.
Yeah, but you see it even when today's generation, when they meet him, you see it that they have so much respect for him. When a Will Smith is going to see him, or a Talib Kweli is going to meet him, or a Jay-Z, you see that they know what that guy has done for music and where he came from, and say how all those hits he wrote and everything he did. So you can't help but have respect for the guy, even if it's not necessarily your type of music, or he's done so much, especially for Black music in America, that you see that people have a huge amount of respect for him.
There was this episode of, I think on Beats One Radio with Dr. Dre, and he was literally starstruck.
Yeah.
He, at the beginning of the episode, he keeps on going like, he's really a fanboy. Sorry to use the word, but he keeps on saying, "You're so good, you're so good, you're this, you're that." And it's really something to hear a gangster producer like Dr. Dre go like that. And he really treats him like the music royalty that he is. And it's really something to see and hear.
But I think that like no one can be a producer and have studied a little bit about music and know about records and about recording and studio engineering and producing and orchestration and arrangements and everything, and not recognize the mark that he's left. That's what's so incredible. So, of course, we think that Dr. Dre's this huge producer, but for him the reference was Quincy. The reference was all these other guys like that came before him. And it's incredible to see how humble and all these, like, you think they're tough guys like from the ghetto and everything, and you see how humble they are when they meet him. I saw this interview with Kendrick Lamar that Quincy Jones did, and they're talking like super close, and you can see that Kendrick he has an appreciation for Quincy. Like he knows that there's something, there's like, even he says that for my generation, we got to know you by listening to Thriller. But you see that he realizes that there was like almost like 50 years before that, or 40 years before that album, that he did other stuff just to bring him to that point in time to be able to make Thriller with Michael Jackson. That's what's incredible.
For sure. I mean, when I listened to that interview, I was like, me too. That's exactly when Michael and Quincy got on my radar. Is when that mini movie came out. It was just like the craziest thing. I remember at Music Plus they said, stay on your TV screens until, I think they played it at midnight or something for the full version.
Really?
Yeah. They made it an event.
Wow.
And I remember staying up and watching I think it's 12 minutes long. And it was the biggest, best, weirdest like cultural event. And I mean, on Music Plus, everything was so streamlined back in the days. Were you in Canada back here?
No.
Back in those days? No, you were in California. Yeah.
Not even.
And everything was so white.
I'm not even sure, because Thriller is 1983, 84. So for me, no. I remember buying the cassette. It was probably a fake cassette in a street somewhere in Africa. You know, that's where
first MJ cassette I had was Bad, actually, because that's when I got my first Walkman. But still, I mean,
but Bad was also produced by Quincy.
It was, but then you could tell that the chemistry wasn't quite the same. I think Michael was taking on more production duties even then, and then I don't know. It's not as timeless, I would say, as
I think Thriller is more raw. It's got this special. It's very raw. It's perfect for that time. Bad is another iteration. It's some other things. The songs they're still very good on Bad, but on Thriller there's something more. There's a magic that and Quincy, he said it. He said that his job is almost to always be recording when he's got the right people in the studio, to be able to capture that little magic that happens when no one's paying attention, when someone is just whistling a little chorus in the corner of the studio, when you think it's the worst idea, but you listen to it 2 days later and you're like, oh, we have like Hans Zimmer would say, we have a tune.
Yeah.
So I think it's incredible that even a great composer, a great arranger like him, he knows that the muse is not always inspiring you, and you have to always be working and working and working and working. You know, they're writing those pages and writing those words to have that 5 minutes of just pure magic of being able to channel exactly what needs to be channeled at that moment, and to be able to recognize that that's the genius. Let's keep that.
So he was a great chooser of songs. He was great at picking the right musicians. He was great at pinpointing who had the talent to go all the way in terms of solo careers. He really had it all.
He prepared himself so well, and then put it all together in the pop and in the 80s.
Yeah. And then you hinted at his TV ventures, and I think when he created Quest, that's where he really, really started to make serious money. And he created what I would think is the best TV show on earth.
Yeah, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with Will Smith. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so again, he had the knack to see Will Smith, the rapper, call him up and say, "Hey, I have something for you." And then he already knew that Will Smith could be a great actor way before probably Will even thought about doing it.
True, true. Well, basically, I think once again, Quincy Jones was ahead of his time. He saw how uh, in the 80s, how rock and roll was becoming this huge thing, and how it wasn't just about the musicians, it was about the shows, but it was also about the image. It was also about the magazines. It was also about the interviews and Rolling Stone and all these things that like really put rock and roll like in the forefront of music. And when he saw hip hop starting to emerge, he thought that it was new, but it needed that boost. It needed that like representation. It needed to have like its own magazines. That's why he created Vibe. It needed to have like TV shows to like to have how can I say, to have role models and everything. And I think that's why he created also Fresh Prince, and he linked it to his media company to first of all put hip hop and that new genre up front to show people what it was, and also I think it was to show the new generation, like to have role models so that people wouldn't be like him at the beginning when he was little, that he thought the only thing he could be was a gangster because there were no role models. There were no black people doing anything like a value of people represented in the media. So he wanted to showcase that. And I think that's why he created his multimedia company, just to so that kids, and especially African American kids, would have role models and would know that there's other things that you can do in life. Plenty of other things.
Yeah, during the Vibe days, he actually had some workshops with the biggest hip hop stars, where he got them all like at um, this big room at a hotel, and
Hmm.
he was asking them to, like you said, be role models, be
Exactly.
positive for
But
the younger
but
generation.
that was the time
And
when Tupac and Biggie got killed, and there
well,
was this
exactly, he
it was
actually
this
tried, I
huge
think,
it was this huge
to
rivalry between the East and the West Coast, and he said, "Come on, guys."
so that makes him the godfather of even hip hop, because he was there in the middle of it all trying to stop Tupac and Biggie from feuding. That's
Yeah,
just crazy.
yeah, true.
So why don't we wrap this up with I gathered a bunch of accomplishments, because obviously his career is just absolutely insane. So just to give our listeners an idea of what this man did from 1940, let's say, to today, Quincy Jones has to his name 82 Grammy nominations, won 28. I
Wow.
don't know of anyone who won that many Grammys. Do
That's
you?
no, not really. Not really.
Yeah, that has to be some kind of record.
Yeah,
As
28.
we said, best-selling album of all times, best-selling single of all times. During this span, he recorded close to 2,900 songs, recorded 300 albums, worked on the TV or movie score of 51 projects, and also recorded 1,000 original songs. So
Wow.
that
That's
songs that went on his Quincy Jones albums,
yeah.
like Quincy
So
Jones the artist.
so imagine 1,000 original composition. That means he probably wrote 20,000 or 30,000. If
Absolutely, that's
if
just
it's not more.
it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And that actually was kind of his demise also, the fact that he could work so hard and so tirelessly. It actually drove his health to the ground. He died first in like the 80s and then died again I don't know, like 5 years ago or something. when he was 82, he had the stroke again.
Yeah.
It's just a painful journey. It's crazy.
Yeah, true. Well, I think it goes to show that being a workaholic, it helps your career, but it can also be detrimental to your health and to your family. And I think it's all about having balance in your life. And sometimes it's not something that we see right away. And sometimes you need a very scary wake up call to show you that you need to take care of yourself and take care of your family.
Yeah. And I think that during this whole time, he hid really well all the pain that he had inside.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, he had a rough upbringing. Like you said, his mother had mental health issues,
Mhm.
and then he was separated from her really early, like I guess like 5 years old or something, 4 years old.
Yeah.
And so, I guess what I'm trying to say is we have to be more conscious as artists of how we use our creative gift, and sometimes not get fooled by using the music as a remedy, you know? Like
Mm.
it is an outlet, but it shouldn't be your end all be all solution to everything emotional.
Yeah. True. True.
And you can tell by the way his relationships with his daughters now and his son has changed
Yeah.
because of all of the scares and the health issues and the yeah. So it's a and final question. I wanted to kick off the episode today with you with this curveball, but I guess JT's curveball of the week is going to be at the very end. I'm going to ask you why, after all of these accomplishments and the incredible life that he had, is Quincy Jones mad?
Why he's mad?
Yeah.
Like angry?
Yeah. Why is he angry? Why does he need to go on the record and spill the personal secrets of people he worked with during all these years? And then,
Angry about what?
so you haven't heard of the infamous Vulture interview? He's saying that the Beatles couldn't play an instrument when he met them. Said that Michael Jackson was really Machiavellian and egotistical, even.
Usually, when we do these podcasts, I try to stay on the positive side of what the person has done and what they've accomplished and the good things. And sometimes I think that like just focusing on one interview or we don't know, like, was he in a bad mood that day? Was he drinking? Was he like? It's. I think it's sometimes a little bit unfair to talk about stuff that's very um I don't know. It seems to be sometimes putting oil on the fire for absolutely nothing. I prefer to focus on the good stuff. And I don't know what he would have said stuff like that. Maybe some of it is true, maybe some of it is not true. Maybe it was the journalist who didn't report his words correctly. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that he didn't. He stood by his word, even though he published an apology letter. He never said that he was misquoted or anything like that. I mean, for me, and that was 2 years ago, by the way, 2018. That interview got out and kind of took the world by storm, really. And honestly, at that time, I was the biggest Quincy Jones fan, and that kind of ruined a bit of it for me because he also sounds kind of racist almost to a point there. And even though he fought for, just opening up the doors for everyone, he was really inclusive in all of his musical works. But then I don't know, to me, it felt like he had kind of been an hypocrite for a long, long time. And he wanted to show his real side or dark side. But I was just curious because you're always more balanced in your opinions than me. Maybe it was just him having a very, very bad day. But I mean, to me, it's just weird that an 82, 83-year old who had everything. I mean, yes, he suffered, but he also had the greatest time. And it was just shocking to me to hear him like drive Michael to the ground, drive the Beatles to the ground, drive, Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando and whoever else slept with these guys. It was just so out of character. And then it just made me think and ponder, well, was it out of character, or maybe we just don't know the extent of Quincy Jones's dark side.
Well, of course, I think I've always said it. When you're that talented and you're pretty much a genius, and whatever you touch kind of turns to gold, and you have all these famous friends, there's always going to be the ego side, and it's very difficult to resist and to put into perspective the ego when you have all these beautiful accomplishments, you have these beautiful friends, you've had this awesome life. It's very difficult to put it into perspective. So I believe that maybe sometimes that ego just shows up unexpectedly, and it turns out that it's an interview for Rolling Stone or whatever paper or whatever news outlet. So I don't think we should judge someone just with like one interview, or like it's kind of like not judging someone because we met them once and they were the way they were. But who knows? Who knows? We get these images of how people are from the outside, but in their private life, they could be totally different people. So I prefer to focus on the incredible accomplishments and the incredible way um, those wonderful albums made me feel, than to try to be disappointed or to judge the person by who they are or who they were in their personal lives. It's kind of that's how I do it.
I like your approach, BK. That certainly reconciles me a bit with the music, because I can't really live without listening to one of his classics. And so to close out this episode, what song would you invite our listeners to listen if they want to get a bit of the special side of this incredible composer, producer, exec, talent scout that is Quincy Jones?
On the jazz side, I think you can't. I think on the pop side, almost everyone like knows him, so we don't have to recommend anything on the pop side. Uh, Soundtrack, it's a little bit more underground. Like I said, I really like this stuff from Roots, but I think if I could recommend something to anyone, I would recommend go listen to big band bossa nova. I think that's a representation of what Quincy was to jazz. I think there's this, like, especially the title Soul Bossa Nova. For me, it represents the whole big band era and the whole feeling of that jazz from the 50s, 40s, 50s. I think it's one of the incredible work that he's done. Like to
So
give
the album was released under Quincy's name?
yeah. It's called the album
Quincy Jones, Soul Bossa Nova.
Exactly.
Right,
1962. And just to give a hint for all those Austin Powers fans, you're gonna recognize some songs from that movie.
Oh yeah, crazy good songs.
Yeah,
indeed. All right. Well, I got two songs that stood out during my research. The first one being one of George Benson's biggest hit, "Give Me the Night."
Oh, yeah.
With the super funky
Yeah.
Sample at the beginning.
Sample that I think you sampled.
I haven't, because actually it was sampled by I Am,
Okay.
the French group, and it became kind of it's just a different animal in its own. Je danse le Mia.
Which song did you sample from George Benson?
George Benson?
Yeah. I think you sampled the guitar at some point, no?
I did sample a lot of George Benson in my days. The title of the songs right now would be a bit, I'd have to dig a bit. But I'll also invite our listeners to, if they're a trap fan, they're going to recognize a very, very cool synthesizer sound in the song Ironside.
Yeah, true.
That was also popularized by a movie by Quentin Tarantino.
Indeed.
I'm not going to say any more on that. Just listen to the song Ironside by Quincy Jones.
Yeah.
And that'll make you realize also the breadth of his musical abilities. He could go all the way to those dark, jazzy funk records, all the way to super jiggy and fun songs like Give Me the Night. And then obviously like the 20 to 30 years of jazz that he provided us with. It's just, I mean, the guy could do it all.
Yeah, indeed. He was really an incredible talent.
Well, on that note, BK, I hope that you're going to go outside because it's still really sunny and beautiful.
We have to enjoy that sun, even if we're in confinement.
Yep. And roll the outro.
Stay safe.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. Remember to subscribe if you like what you hear. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. Also, if you want to support us, head on to delicatebeats.com. You can find our serum packs, our contact instruments, and also plenty of freebies if you subscribe to the newsletter. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook.